Hello, Melissa Crook here. Welcome back to the Field Podcast this week. We are here today with our episode, No Longer in Bondage, with Logan Hufford. Today's ways to engage with this episode are as follows. When setting your boundaries, think about the way you're wording your expectations. Instead of making it about the other person's behavior, make it about what your behavior will be if theirs doesn't change. You can't be responsible for someone else's decisions, but you can be responsible for your own. I hope that you find this helpful and supportive today as you listen and engage with today's powerful episode with Logan Hufford. Thanks so much for being with us.
Hello, Field Podcast audience. Welcome back this week. We are going to have a really important conversation today. And I want to say up front how much appreciation and respect I have for my guest and his willingness to come on and talk about something that's difficult, but that he feels really powerfully about the fact that he wants to be part of these conversations because this topic is happening more than we talk about, and it's important to acknowledge it and give resources and talk about the ways to heal and move forward, both personally and in your relationships, because it is a topic that has a very heavy impact on relationships, especially if you're married or in a serious long-term relationship, if you're a parent, all those kinds of things. I want to welcome Logan Hufford with me today. I met Logan through our good friends at Podmatch, and we're going to be talking about sexual addiction today. And I want you to know that up front because that can be a topic that is very difficult for people. But I want you to know we're going to handle it with a ton of intentionality and empathy and respect and consciousness. But we want to, here on the Field Podcast, I feel very strongly about talking about things that we need to talk about so we can be healthy and well. And this is one of those areas that there's a lot of stigmas around and that we don't always feel like there's safe places for us to land and talk about it openly and be vulnerable and authentic within that. And so that's why I felt like it was so important to have Logan on and have this conversation today. Logan, welcome to the Field Podcast. I'm really glad to have you here with me.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm happy to be on this.
Absolutely. Before we get started, tell me, how would you describe yourself from a character trait standpoint? What are some character traits that describe you as a person?
The first one that comes to mind, because this is a big part of what I talk about in recovery. It's a big part of what when I'm as a dad, talking with people all the time, is I strive to be authentic. I usually say I am not seeking perfection, but I am seeking to be authentic. So authenticity is huge. And I value that in my relationships and other people. Like, you could be all kinds of people, all kinds of things, but you better be authentic, or else I don't want to spend a lot of time with you, just to be totally frank.
Yeah.
And then I would say grateful and feeling like continually going through exercises of humility, I'll put it that way. I feel like God is constantly putting me through various, trials of, making sure that I stay humble. Authentic, grateful, and continually experiencing humbling.
Yeah. Those are really good. And I'm really glad you talked about that. I think sometimes for guys, it can really be hard to talk about authenticity and vulnerability and feel safe in doing that. Would you say that's something you have grown into, or is that something that's just always been part of who you are?
I'd say I've always had a natural bent towards authenticity in a large way.
Yeah.
But like I've always, I think anyone that's known me for my entire life would accurately say, like, at any point in my life, you could sit down with me and have a real conversation. I think that's always been true.
Yeah.
But with my story and where I took my life, and grappling with addiction for a lot of years, I got myself to a point where I felt like I couldn't be authentic anymore. And so the natural bent was still there. The desire to be authentic was still there. But it was like I forced myself to do everything I could to live a double life, to purposely put on a mask and live a lie so I could be husband Logan when I'm with my wife. I can be dad Logan when I'm with my kids. I can be, Christian Logan when I'm at church. And then when I'm at work with my buddies, I'm going to be that Logan. When I'm seeking out an affair, I'm going to be that Logan. And I siloed my emotions. I siloed these personality and character traits. And for a whole lot of reasons, that's an incredibly destructive way to live. And that's how I lived for a lot of years.
Wow. Okay. We're going to come back to that because I think this is going to tie into a talking point we have down the lane regarding emotional, mental, physical health and the connections. And when we disconnect from our authentic self. So we're going to hold on to that. We're going to come back to that. But before we get there, I want to talk about prioritizing self-care in your life. And this is the whole package. This isn't just the daily run you might go for, or the trip to the gym, or the walk. It is the whole spiritual, mental, physical, emotional, all the whole package, your sexual health, all these things. Talk to me about your self-care before in 2016 when you determined it was time to take the narrative back of your life, I would say, versus now. Talk to me about that journey.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to the first part of that question is going to be real skinny. There was no self-care. There was no there was no strategy. There was no desire for self-care. It was just I'm just living compulsively and impulsively. Over the last several years, I'll be honest, I don't have like I see it on Instagram and stuff, and I'm not bashing. I think these things are really cool if you can stick to them. I see like these checklists, and I see like a plan, and I'm like, man, I don't do anything like that. But I can tell you, I mean, there are definitely some pillars to taking care of myself. And when I say taking care of myself, that doesn't mean making myself happy, because I think that's a really, really big misconception that exists out there. In fact, I said this, and I'm sure it caused some upset feelings in some people, but I think there's self-care and I think there's selfish care.
Yeah.
Which I like, me wanting to feel good, make myself happy. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it's really important to clearly identify true self-care, right? Holistically making myself healthier versus feeling good.
Yes.
And so like self-care, ultimately, I would define that as things that I do to make myself a healthier person, right? So one thing that I've absolutely taken from recovery is, that continual moral inventory, continually checking in on, are there people I need to seek to reconcile with? Do I need to apologize to any of my kids for anything? Do I need to apologize to my wife for anything? Is there stuff that at work that I'm really not pulling my weight, or I got to be honest with somebody about something? Like, is there stuff I got to do there? So that moral inventory is a big piece of it. That's absolutely self-care. And that's not very fun. I'll tell you that right now. Yeah. That's not very fun, but it's a huge part of self-care. And it goes back to authenticity, right? If I'm going to be authentic and I'm going to talk about this stuff, on Instagram and on podcasts, I better make sure that I'm out there living it, right? Yeah. And 100%, like some of the things you mentioned as, a piece of it, those definitely are pieces of mine, in terms of, for me, the gym is basketball, but like, having that outlet, that physical outlet to be able to, run and sweat and all that. But it's also a huge, social and camaraderie aspect which is awesome. And I've been able to share this, with guys at the gym. And I never would have thought, but they follow me on Instagram, or, they saw, I mentioned a podcast or something, they checked it out, and like, they send me a side text message like, dude, I never would have known, but here's stuff I'm going through too. So that's an incredible thing, that the community, the healthy community is huge.
Yeah.
Building my friendship with my wife is a huge part of my self-care. building that relationship and make sure that I'm maintaining that trust, but actively feeding the friendship.
Yeah.
Because I very much believe that friendship is, it is a plant, right? It's not just a thing it's not a brick that's sitting there. That's something I've got to actively feed, or it will wither. And I've 100%, even since getting in recovery, like I actively have let it wither some days, right? Where I'm not intentionally feeding it, but that's a huge part of my self-care. And I'm a Christian. I absolutely am always going to be front and center about that. So checking in on my relationship with Christ and my prayer life. Am I prioritizing God, or am I looking at him as, like taking a supplement? That's a huge piece of it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I love how you delineated between feeling good versus being healthy, because they're not always in sync with each other. And so it's like when you're looking for that activity to fill your cup, is it coming from a healthy place? Where's the root of that in? I think that's a very important part of the conversation when we're looking at our health journey. I've listened to some of the other podcasts you've been on and did my research a little bit before you and I sat down together. You come from a this is your word that you use, a kind of a vanilla background. You don't fit the quote unquote profile, we'll say, that people would think about with someone who has experienced sexual addiction. So how did this unfold? And this can be however you want to lay that out in a way that feels, healthy and safe to you.
Sure.
But how did you go? This kid growing up in suburban Anchorage, Alaska, with a family and a house and woods and friends to run around in, and a church and school and sports and all the things that kids in America grow up with. It's look really great on paper. So talk to me about this journey.
Yeah, because it's one thing to say like, oh, I had this white picket fence family that I grew up in, but what you didn't see was behind closed doors, feeling like, and that's absolutely true for some people. But that's not even my story. Like, no, behind closed doors, of course, nothing's perfect, but behind closed doors, I was loved, I was safe. Like I had a family that cared for me. I was raised by, my mom and my dad and siblings that, sure, we fought sometimes as siblings, but overall we got along well. I'm close with all of them to this day. So it's like I had as blessed of an upbringing as you can have, and yet I still became a raging sex addict, because at the end of the day, addiction is no respecter of persons, right?
Yeah.
And that's not to say that addiction found me. I made choices to chase after, those dopamine hits, to chase after the new and the different and the more, to chase after riskier, to chase after things that would give me more thrill of the chase, the forbidden fruit, right?
Yeah.
And got myself to where it started at like age 9 or 10. I don't remember the exact number, but age 9 or 10 with lingerie pictures in a JCPenney catalog. Not porn by any definition that we would think of, right?
Yeah.
But that was my introduction to sexually objectifying pictures of women.
Yeah.
And then, 14 years later, I've got kids. I've been married for several years, and I've been having affairs, year after year, and addicted to pornography and hiring prostitutes. And yet I had the most ideal family upbringing that you would probably ever picture.
Wow. I think it's important too that you hit on the age, because I think sometimes we avoid having conversations with our kids because we think they're too young to hear about these things. Yeah. And so many times we're doing them a disservice because we haven't given them the insight, the education they need. And that's a tricky line. Parenting doesn't come with a handbook, and every kid's emotional maturity is different. So many times as parents, what we had access to as kids is different than what our kids have access to now. I mean, for you, it's even more so what your kids have. I mean, you already had access to a lot at age 9 compared to what your parents did in terms of where, it wasn't just in magazines. The online things were becoming more and more of it, very present and even more so now. So knowing what you know now, how does this impact the way you and your wife will talk to your kids about what they need to know?
Yeah, I'll give you a big fat disclaimer. We do not have it figured out, and you're 100% right. And it's tricky. It's so hard.
Yeah.
We've got 4 boys. They're right now.
Oh gosh.
We're about to hit birthday season here in March, but right now they're 12, 11, 10, and 8.
Wow.
So we're literally in the thick of these kids are at various stages of, our 8-year-old, and he's definitely one where he wants to play with toy trucks and go play in the mud. So girls are like, ugh, girl, what's that?
Yeah,
Plus,
yeah.
the only girl he knows is his mom, right? So he's still very much a little kid in that way.
Sure.
But, within a year, who knows? Within a year,
right.
Maybe he, has a crush on the neighbor girl, whatever. That's all totally natural. Our 12-year-old is very much he's got crushes on these different girls, and she's so pretty. Again, that, there's nothing wrong with that. Right? That's natural.
It's all part of growing up. Yeah.
There's this spectrum, and my 11-year-old would only want to talk to a girl if she wants to go look at spiders and ants out in the backyard. He would do that. He's all about it. So we're living right now in this spectrum of we've got different kids who have different emotional intelligence levels. They've got different interests. They have different personalities. And so, we not only do we not have it figured out on when we're going to introduce various things to different or to one kid, let alone to all of the kids. Right.
Sure.
So that's a really long way of getting around to one thing we do practice is we do practice a lot of transparency and vulnerability. And I'll share for me at least, what the difference between those two look like.
Yeah.
Because the way I look at it, and I didn't come up with this, I'm stealing this, but I don't know who to give credit to. But transparency would be, maybe sharing my past, right? Sharing some of my past with my kids. And we have done that. They know our story.
Sure.
But the vulnerability piece is it's not a glass wall. You can come on the other side of that wall and live in my space with me. And what I mean by that is we give our kids, as long as they're respectful about it, they can ask us any question at any time. There is nothing off the table. There's nothing we won't talk about. And that can be tricky.
Yeah.
I've been asked about, Dad, what so-and-so said this is a curse word. What does that mean? What where does that come from? Where does that word come from? And we're going to talk about it. And I'm going to do my best to be intentional and strategic with how I talk about it. But we're going to talk about it. I'm not going to say, oh, no, you shouldn't ask about that.
Yeah.
And, so talking about sex, talking about healthy affection in a marriage, we absolutely have those conversations with them. And it's definitely not a conversation. It's not a conversation with the boys about how sex works. It's ongoing dialogue. And, Lord willing, that we keep that dialogue, we keep that portal, open and lubricated so they can always come talk to us. And again, that's easier with some kids than others. And it's going to be easier with one parent than another, right?
Absolutely.
I know my 12-year-old's more comfortable talking to my wife than he is with me. And so, of course, ideally, if we've got a mom and a dad raising the kids together, hopefully they can work to be on the same page with this kind of stuff too, right? But
sure.
It's, I feel like I spent 10 minutes basically saying, I'm not sure, but we're trying hard. So.
No, but you said something really important, conversation versus dialogue. And you've established early on with the kids that nothing's off the table. And it takes away that element of shame and, I can't talk to them about this. Oh, I've been bad. All those things that keep kids from feeling like they can be honest with people that they need help from, whether that's parents, aunts, uncles, somebody, grandparents, whatever they look up to. And that dialogue piece, that ongoing, and just owning up front that we're figuring this out as we go, but we're doing the best we can to provide a safe space with open, honest conversations for our kids to land so they can have as much information with love as possible.
So, I mean, this is I wasn't planning on sharing this, but this is a real life example that a really cool example. It just happened last night with our oldest boy, who, not only is he our oldest, but he's also by far the most extroverted. He's by far, he's the most like me, to be totally honest, the most like me in terms of, wanting to do all the things and wanting
right.
healthy or unhealthy. Right.
Yeah,
and so there's a level of maturity of the conversations I have with him that are even different than than I would have with the other boys at this point. But so like we're playing a game on the floor and we're listening to music on my phone, and there's a song that I love this song, but it's got some tough lyrics in it. It's not bad, but it's I think it's called "Somebody Save Me."
And
I love that song.
Yeah,
but like in this,
but it's powerful. It's
right.
Yeah,
and of course, I'm sure most people listening probably know the song, or if you hear it, you'll probably recognize it. I love it.
Yeah.
But so like we're listening to this song, "Somebody Save Me," and my boy Eli, he repeats everything, and so he's singing along with it. And so I'm like, I just want to make sure. So I'm like, so what do you think about the lyrics, or what do you think about this song? And he's like, or I asked him, I said, do you get what they're saying about? Because I know there's some tough words in here, but do you get what they're saying about?
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I wasn't sure at first, but I think I understand it. And I did not coach him or guide him to say any of this. I just asked that question, and he goes, and we're just like playing a little card game as he's talking. He's like, I think he's saying that he felt so broken and so trapped, just like how you did when you had your porn addiction. And he's telling the lady to not waste time on him because he feels like he's a bad person, just like you felt like mom shouldn't spend time on you because you were so broken. He's like, wow. But you were able to find freedom. And I shared that only for the reason of like, that's just one moment, right? But like that was such a blessing to be able to like have that conversation with him, and just to know that he has that knowledge within himself, right?
Yeah.
And of course, I'm a walking example of the fact that somebody can be equipped with things. That doesn't mean that they're going to make all the right choices. But like I put it this way, I can't make my kids do the right things, but I can give them a map, right?
Yeah.
So that if you find yourself trapped in this cave, you don't have to figure out the way out all by yourself.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful that we can have those conversations.
Sure.
That, it's not about like, oh my goodness, I'm so thankful I get to have a relationship with my family. I'm so like with my kids. I just hope they don't ever find out about what a monster I used to be.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. A lot of people will do that, and they will hide things out of their own shame, and because they just haven't been able to heal to a point where it feels safe and okay. And I think some of that is generational and resource and what we've been told we can and can't talk about. But I also want to point out too that this happened in the context of you spending time. Teachable moments are not the things that you plan out in ahead of time. I mean, they can be, but the really ones that stick with kids, that stick with relationships, are the ones that come up in just time spent, and where there's just an honest back and forth. I can look back on my own life with my own daughters and my own relationships, and so many times those things just come up in a time spent that wasn't, okay, we're going to sit down and I'm going to, we're going to wait for that, so I think that's really important to point out too.
And I can be I can be the absolute first person to try to plan out like this lecture for my kids, or like I'm gonna hit these 6 bullet points, and these are and you're right though, because like usually, yeah, they might respectfully listen or whatever, but they're not absorbing as much as like when we can just have a real life interaction, real life experience, 100%. But yeah, what you said, it is so key. And I know you already said it, but I'm just going to like emphasize it, make sure everyone hears it clearly. If somebody has not experienced healing, and this could be from addiction, this could be on the other side, right? An abuse or betrayal survivor, right? Somebody who has experienced these traumatic things, if they've not experienced that healing, it's the last thing they would ever feel safe is to talk about it with anybody, right? Let alone with the little humans they've been charged with taking care of. But I do try to always make that distinction when talking about our story is it's not that my past defines me, but it's also not true that my past was just like glossed over and doesn't exist anymore. Like 100%, it motivates me. It has defined my mission, right? It does define how I go about life, but in a healthy way instead of a shame-based way.
Yes. And this is, we're going to talk about layers today. I mean, that's one of the questions. Our lives are full of layers, and they aren't all layers we love, but to be healthy and healed and whole, you got to be able to get to a space of acceptance with those layers so that you can live, authentically, vulnerably, safely, in a way that allows you to be your full self, not shrouded in shame, not shrouded in fear. And we'll talk about that more, but that's such an important distinction and part of this. Thank you so much for that. All right. Confidently setting boundaries. I would think that boundaries have to play a role in terms of this healing process and what is good and safe and healthy for you across the board. So talk to me about your boundaries journey, because boundaries is an interesting conversation, because I'm sure you had boundaries before, but they were more like walls that were separating and partitioning these parts of your life. They weren't like a fence or a guidepost that was there to protect you.
Yeah, I'm like literally silently chuckling because no, I didn't have boundaries. I didn't have walls or anything. I mean, of course I knew the word boundaries, but I had no clue what boundaries were. Like, not really.
Yeah.
One of the first recovery groups I ever attended, was the head guy was going over boundaries. And he was like, we're going to talk about healthy boundaries. And I'm like, okay, like this will be good for me to learn. And he's talking about boundaries, and he's like, I want everyone to write out an example of what's a good boundary for you. And I'm like, okay, I've never done this. This is a cool exercise. Let me think about it. And I'm trying my best to think. And so I wrote down it. Now, what I'm about to say is going to sound terrible in a way, but it's also, this gives you a look into like where I was.
Sure.
So I wrote down on this sheet of paper some ideas for boundaries for myself. The first one I wrote down was, I will not cheat on my wife anymore. Like, in one way, like in a really, really dark way, like that's laughable, right?
Yeah.
Because that should not be a boundary. That should not need to be a boundary.
Right.
But that's how far gone I was.
Sure.
Is like, okay, like that would be a good thing to shoot for.
Yeah.
Because I currently, my whole life was, porn was my maintenance drug. And I'm having affairs with, people when I can have affairs with them. I'm gonna hire prostitutes to satisfy that itch. And that was my life. It was so much darkness, so much evil. I had other addictions as well, all mixing through it. And it was this whole thing filled with shame, filled with self-hatred. So the idea of like, okay, what are some things I should make sure to stay away from? Like, well, I should stop cheating. It's like, well, duh, yeah, but that, it wasn't that it didn't occur to me before. It was, I just didn't know like what boundaries need to be. That no, the boundary should be a guardrail far, far away from the cliff, not actually just a fence on the cliff's edge.
Right.
And then, I mean, we could literally do like a 6-part episode, I'm sure, just talking about boundaries. But one thing I have certainly realized over the course of recovery, both, working with guys, and then, not that my wife and I don't, share anonymous stuff, obviously, with each other, but,
Sure.
but I know the types of things she's working on. She knows the types of things I'm working on with guys. She works with women, I work with men. People in general just don't understand, right? I was a raging addict and didn't understand, but most average people walking around just don't understand boundaries.
That's really true. I feel like it's a new conversation that's been happening in the last 5, maybe 10 years.
Yes. And there's so many words that are like these trendy buzzwords. Yeah. And boundaries is, I think, definitely one of them. Where it's like, it is really, really important, but understand what you're talking about. Understand what it is.
Exactly.
And, one of the things that my wife is always instilling in her gals, in the betrayal trauma healing group, is people can't overstep your boundaries because it's not about their behavior. Right?
Yeah.
And so, to take my example, which is a real example, and to sort of flip it on its head, if my wife were to have been in that same room and she's like, okay, I'm going to make a boundary, Logan, you can't cheat on me anymore. Well, that's absolutely, like that should be something that you should not have to even worry about, right? And he shouldn't cheat on you, but that can't be your boundary because it's not, because that's about his behavior.
Yeah.
So, a healthy boundary there would be, if you cheat on me, I will pack up and leave, right? Or I'm going to do whatever. And so, having those boundaries, a big part of the program that I was in, which is basically a voluntary house arrest for 2 years. And it's built off of the 12 steps. So it is a Christ-centered recovery program. It delves super deep into the science of how my brain works. It's super hardcore on practical, tangible, concrete correctives and tools. So it's all 3 things. It's practical, it's scientific, and it's Christ-based. And it's really, really hardcore. It's the most hardcore program that I've ever heard of or experienced, except for maybe some like in-treatment programs that could be out there. But it's super, super invasive and really, really structured, but for obvious reasons. And so one big part of that is coming up with boundaries. And a couple things there too, just to highlight, is this process. When I wrote out my boundaries, I got feedback so there's a whole mentorship team, all the guys that have graduated from the program, as well as guys that are currently in the program, if they choose to be there, because it's all voluntary. We're all just giving back, right? So some nights there might be 4 graduates, some nights there might be 10 graduates. But the mentorship team, whoever wants to be there, they give me feedback on my proposed boundaries. They ask me questions, they poke and they prod, and they hold my feet to the fire. So there's a lot of, them checking me, right? There's a lot of them, asking me tough questions and giving me tough feedback. But the beautiful part about it, and it circles back to that thing about boundaries that we just talked about, is at the end of the day, the final product, and it wasn't a day, it usually was a multi-week process to come up with boundaries.
Sure.
The final product has one name on it, and that's mine.
Yeah.
Because it's not Bob's boundaries for Logan, right? It's not Tim's boundaries for Logan. Those are Logan's boundaries. And some of the most senior mentors, they would constantly remind me of that. They'd be like, hey, I have these ideas. I like, this is them talking, right? I have ideas, I have thoughts, I have opinions. And I do think that maybe you should change the verbiage here, whatever. But it's your boundary, Logan. And if you try to stick to it just because we told you to stick to it, you're not going to take ownership of it, and you're going to be resentful.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not going to feel accountable to something that doesn't feel like it's authentically yours.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
I experienced that, to be honest. And this was, I think this was 3 years ago. This was well after I graduated, but I got out of the car business after a long time being in the car. That's a whole other story, but I'm so thankful to be out of that, and got into a new industry. And part of that new industry was doing like training sessions and stuff via Zoom with some other coaches. And my wife at one point, she said, hey, I don't mind you doing that, but can you just make sure that like, unless we talk about it, that if it's a woman, that they don't have your cell phone number. Like totally reasonable thing, right?
Completely,
and we're talking, I'm like, yeah, that's no problem. Like I'm not worried about these. All of these women that I've ever talked to have seemed very safe and very on the up and up. Like not worried about that at all. No problem. Well, I don't know if it was 2 months later or 6 months later, whatever. But I'm on a Zoom call talking to this lady who her expertise was taxes, and talking to her about that. And she's like, okay, I'm going to send you some resources. Here, matter of fact, I'll text you the link right now. She's like, what's your cell phone? And in that moment, I didn't want to say, I can't give you my cell phone number because, I explained the whole thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I froze, and then I did like the mental gymnastics in my head real quick. Like it was a math equation. Like I don't have any worries about her being unsafe. I don't have any worries about me, not being on the up and up. I'm going to give her my cell phone. It's fine. So I gave her my cell phone number, and I felt really bad afterwards. I'm like, I shouldn't have done that. And so afterwards I talked to a recovery brother, and I was like, this is what happened. And I know there was nothing inappropriate going on, but I don't feel right about it.
Yeah. And
in that conversation, and I did share this with my wife, and in that conversation with that brother, some verbiage came out of my mouth. I said, I broke my wife's boundary. And then it hit me. That's what it was to me.
Yeah.
I was trying to follow my wife's rule or my wife's boundary for me. I didn't take ownership of it for myself.
Yeah.
And this was like 5 years into recovery.
Yeah.
But that was honestly a huge lesson for me that, thankfully was a lesson learned that didn't involve, I'm not going to say, I shouldn't say like it didn't involve any stakes, but, it didn't involve any direct harm.
Right. Nothing hurtful from that standpoint.
Like my wife definitely was like, that stinks that you just gave your cell phone because you were embarrassed, but I do appreciate you sharing that. But like that lesson was really, really important for me to learn. Is like, I got to have ownership over this stuff. Otherwise I'm just trying to live by somebody else's rules. And that's not going to play out well.
No. And it goes, and we'll talk about that when we talk about expectations, but that's a very good point. And I love how you delineated this on that boundaries piece. It is about our behavior and what creates safety for us and health for us and well-being for us. And people will do or not do whatever it is, but it is and I think that we run into problems with that. We're like, we will do this. You need to stop doing that. It's like, no. When this happens, this is the action I'm going to take. You do whatever you're going to do. Just know that when this happens, this is the action I'm going to take. And that is such an important delineation. So thank you for that example. I think that's really important for people to understand when we're talking about boundaries and what healthy boundaries are.
Right. Well, and just really quick, just like we were talking earlier about self-care or, my little made up term, like selfish care. It's not about good versus bad necessarily, but I do think, accurately categorizing things is really important. And so the same thing, like there's a place for a healthy request, right?
Sure.
There's a place to say, this is my desire, or this is my need, or this is my expectation. Like there can be very unhealthy versions of those things, but there can be very healthy versions.
Absolutely.
For my wife to say, I have a desire that you would, I'm just making this up, like that you would take basketball off next Monday and could you hang out at home and help me with such and such?
Right.
But she's not trying to control me. She's stating a healthy request. Right?
Absolutely. Yep.
But for her to say, Logan, I'm making a boundary. You're not allowed to go. Well, that's different.
That's not the same thing. Absolutely.
And so just making sure that our verbiage is accurate, that we're categorizing these things correctly. And that's where it's hard to do by myself. It's almost impossible to do if I've lived in an unhealthy state, as an addict, or in my wife's shoes, as somebody in survival mode for years. And that's where, I got to have community. I got to have people that have been down this path that know what they're doing that can help me. Right.
Yeah. Language matters. Verbiage matters. Absolutely. Yeah. So important. All right. taking care of your emotional health, your physical health, your mental health, your spiritual health, all of those sexual health. I mean, I think this could be really a tricky thing in a marriage when you've come from this, what that does to the trust and the sexual health piece specifically. But talk to me about your journey with that and those connections. Like when you were living in this mode of raging addiction, looking back now, did you feel these things manifesting in your body in a physical way, like stressors, or were you just so in such an autopilot with it that I'm just curious about the impacts, because I
Yeah.
have seen in my life absolutely with the way these connect, and also, and you may have for your wife too. I mean, you talk about, I mean, living in survival mode. These things, these traumas impact our health and our well-being. So talk to me about it from your standpoint first, and then what you've learned from your wife's side as well.
Yeah. And I'll just really quickly, I'll say, as far as your last question, I absolutely will share some from my wife's perspective. I'll keep it fairly short and sweet, first and foremost, because I don't want to talk too much for somebody else, but also
Absolutely.
I'm only going to share things that she has shared, in her own testimony, right? Like I'm not going to speculate. Like, I think she was feeling this way.
Yeah.
In terms of me, so two different things come to mind. Number one, when you asked about like physically, what did I feel? What came to mind was not sexual addiction. What came to mind was my struggle with anger, which was absolutely something that I, from the time that we first had kids, because I'll tell you right now, I never, ever thought I had an anger problem until I had kids.
Wow.
Because I mean, what greater test of patience and control than having little humans, right? So like literally, I thought I was the most easygoing, patient, lax dude in the world until I had kids. So I mean, I deeply struggled with rage for years. And honestly, until about 3 years ago was when I started experiencing freedom from that. But, when I think about physical reactions, physical responses, feeling physically trapped in a behavioral cycle, anger comes to mind much more than the sexual aspect, actually. Like when I would feel a trigger and I would physically want to yell, or I'd physically clench up, I'd want to lash out. There was a time where it felt automatic, just like, 10 years ago, something might happen and I feel like I've got to go look at porn, or I've got to go flirt with that woman, or it wasn't so much a physical thing. It was much more, it was definitely a brain thing. Physical things were happening. I didn't necessarily have like physical feelings.
Sure.
The way that I did with anger, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so interesting. It's interesting what comes up in our minds and our bodies when all these things are happening that you maybe just didn't see coming or didn't realize were there, and how they're all interconnected. When you started down your healing path, first off, what was the kind of epiphany moment that was like, now's the time. I cannot go on like this anymore?
Yeah. There was definitely a moment that got me started on that journey.
Okay.
And that was, my wife gave me an ultimatum. And this was the summer of 2015. And so if anybody's doing the math at home, almost a year went by between I got an ultimatum and I started an active recovery. I started in sobriety. I started seriously attacking this thing. So wildly imperfect journey. A lot of the stuff from that area, for sure was, this is descriptive, not prescriptive.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the summer of 2015, I had another affair, and I would always confess like a semi-regular thing. This was like this cycle that we had, is I would confess to my wife, I'm so sorry I did it again. I'm so sorry I did it again. I'll never do it again. I'm so sorry. So there's almost a year between I got the ultimatum and I engaged in serious recovery and sobriety and in my program and that sort of thing. But yeah, summer of 2015, I had another affair and confessed to my wife, as I would do, usually once or twice a year, confess, I'm so sorry I had another affair. I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. But never, any new healthy behavior, just confessions. And in the summer of 2015, she did something she'd never done before. And I look at it as absolutely the grace of God and Carrie's strength. And she had no coaching. She had no resources that she was going to.
Yeah.
But she finally faced her abuser and said, I can't control you. I can't control what you do. But if you continue to hurt me this way, if you don't seek help, like serious help, then you're going to lose me in the voice. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's ultimately, that's what she said.
Sure.
And she very much emphasized she would physically be leaving and she would be physically taking the voice. And I did believe her. I believed her.
Yeah.
It scared me. I did not want that. I had completely given up any hope of being a good dad, being a good husband, having any sort of a mission in life. Like I'd totally given up on that. But if I could try to have, a few more years with my family, I wanted to salvage whatever I could get there. So total hopelessness. And so I started to go to some groups. I started to do some things, which is like, that's very weak verbiage, but it's accurate verbiage. I started to do some things.
Yeah.
And, I had some time of sobriety. At one point I had 4 months of sobriety, but no recovery, no healing, not a lot of accountability, just like white knuckling. I'm not going to do it. And had a bad day at work, went off in the bathroom, looked at porn, right back into it. And so there was basically a 10-month period of that. And this is where I'm saying like descriptive, not prescriptive, because some people was like, well, why didn't your wife leave? And she totally could have. I do think, she was seeing some attempts at serious change, even though the fruit was not great fruit for a while. Yeah. But what happened in that time, what happened in that season of trying some things, because I preach all the time that if you earnestly seek healthy resources, if you earnestly seek healthy counsel and healthy people, I don't care where you live. I don't care how small of a town you live in. You will find those things. Like, I don't know what it'll look like, but you will find those things.
Sure. And
I found those things. First and foremost, it came in the form of a man named Rick. And he was at a group. It's a mixed group for, different addictions and different struggles in life, that kind of thing. Got a lot of love for this group, but it's a relatively shallow type group.
Sure.
And he's like, hey, I'm glad you're here, but you need more than this group. He's like, you need more than this. I think you need this group called Prodigals. And he's like, and he described it a little bit. He's like, it was the hardest thing I ever did. I think, but I needed it. He's like, I think that's what you should do. I'm like, okay, that sounds like a lot of work. I don't want to do all that. At one point, this is, I always share this because this gives a great look into, how God started to set people in my life that, communicated that, hey, we're going to do things differently now. Yeah. So at one point, I'd been to a few meetings, I'd seen Rick a few times, and I was like trying to do the right thing and really step up. And I was like, Rick, could we get coffee every now and again? Would you, and we could talk about this stuff. And in my head, I'm really trying something, right? Yeah. And he looked at me, and Rick is somebody who is now one of my best friends. He's a father figure to me. And he's a grandpa to my boys, and he's like the most loving person I know. And Rick goes, if you want to get together for coffee every now and again, I don't have time for you. And that hurt my feelings. That stung. Because people had not talked to me like that before. I always could work the room. I could always get my way. I could always figure out a way to get what I wanted or some version of it. And Rick would go on. Within a couple months, he started working with me in the mentorship program. He was my mentor, like my sponsor for those 2 years, and obviously an ongoing mentor. And God gave me those things that I wanted. He gave me sobriety. He gave me healthy counsel. He gave me healthy resources. But all those things that I didn't think I could have, all those things that I had completely signed away, right? To be able to look my boys in the eye, just like I said at the very start of this conversation, not as a perfect dad, but as an authentic dad. Yeah. To come home to my wife every day, not as a perfect husband, but I'm authentic and I don't have secrets in my phone. And I'm not worried about my browser history, and I'm not worried about, if I'm running errands and I'm out and about, who somebody might see in my car, right? Like, like that was just my life for years.
Wow.
And so, and the freedom to, as we said also earlier, to not just be free from the bad things, but to walk in the rest of my life with this incredible calling, to give back to others the way that Rick and a lot of people gave back to me. It's been totally imperfect, but this beautiful journey, since May of 2016. But it started with that ultimatum. It started with Carrie saying, just like we say it with boundaries, I can't control what you do, but I can control how I respond. And I'm no longer going to respond by just saying, I forgive you. Okay. I forgive you. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So talk to me then. We said this a little bit for, Carrie, you all made a decision, and this really kind of goes into how we can support ourselves and others in living unapologetically. You all made a very big decision at some point that you were now going to counsel and help other people. You help the guys and she helps the women. Talk to me about the kind of healing journeys you each had to go through to get to that point. I mean, I would, because I think that's really important to address that for anybody that's listening out there. If you are either, and men and women can have sex addiction. Addiction doesn't know, it's not just a man thing, it's a woman thing. And I think that's very important to point out. So this can be affecting relationships either way, whatever ways there are. But before you can help other people, you've really got to help yourself first. And you've really got, so talk to me about both the collective, but also individual journeys that you each had to go on to get to a point where you could show up unapologetically for each other, and then in turn show up unapologetically supporting these other people that you now support.
Yeah. And we have had our own individual recovery journeys, our own individual healing journeys that have absolutely, in a beautiful way, our recovery and healing journeys are, they intertwine with each other's and they touch each other, but they are individual.
Yeah.
It's sort of, I guess in my head, I'm picturing like a DNA strand where it's like you have two different strands, like they're intermingling, but they're separate, but they also have become a thing. Right. And so like, I can say now, like we have our healing journey that is a single entity in a beautiful way, but we also very much, and at the start, it was almost exclusively our individual healing journeys because she absolutely had made the decision that she was going to seek her healing journey regardless of whether or not I sought mine. She was not going to do recovery and work on her stuff, work on her healing, as long as I stayed on the path. If I went off and did who knows what, she recognized that she had wounds. And instead of ignoring them because they weren't her fault, she was going to follow through with her healing process. Yeah. Because her healing process was about her wounds that needed attention. Yeah. And that's something that it gets missed a lot, and it's really heartbreaking. Yeah. So we had our individual healing processes. We have our collective healing processes, especially as time has gone on. And I mean, this is a crazy thing that speaks to that. And this was a few years ago as well. 2 to 3 years ago, we shared our testimony. We've done a few times, like together. We've done a few times, but we hadn't done it in a couple years. And we were, in terms of sharing our testimony in front of a group of people as a couple. And so we were taking our written testimony that we'd done before, and we were like making some edits and revisions. And we were sitting on the couch and just looking over it. And, I'm like, let's take out this paragraph, or, we should probably include a couple sentences about such and such. And we're sitting there and we're looking at this paragraph that would have been probably like 2 years before I got into recovery. So call it like 2014. So I'm in the middle of all of this darkness. She's in the middle of all of this betrayal trauma. And this paragraph is detailing this time where I confessed another affair. She's laying on the bathroom floor, crying and screaming out to God. And in this paragraph, we're sitting on the couch and she's like, hey, this one part, should it be a period or should we do a semicolon? And like in that moment, I really do believe like God allowed me to kind of like zoom out and have like not literally an out of body experience, but like mentally have an out of body experience. And be like, you and Carrie are sitting on the couch debating the grammar on this paragraph that's detailing something that by all human logic should have completely obliterated your marriage, right?
Yeah.
And in most cases would have.
Sure.
And yet you're at a point where it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, right? It doesn't mean that the past doesn't exist, but you're at a point where by God's grace, like you've experienced enough healing to where you can talk about it from an objective standpoint and worry about the grammar.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel funny, like sharing that story. Cause I just, the only reason I share it is just to say like, I think it's a reminder that healing is possible.
Yeah.
But it took years, for her not to be trapped and frozen in time as the betrayed spouse forever.
Yeah.
For me not to feel, the shame or I'm stuck in my addiction cycle. I'm just going to keep on screwing up and doing the same old thing. It took years, but even me, that somebody who felt like I was the worst of all, there is no hope for me. There's no change in me, but it was possible. And, over the last several years, we talk about, healing journey and giving back. I mean, I view it as not in a negative way, but I view it as an obligation, to give back.
Yeah.
When I think of, when I picture Rick's face, when I think of the names and the faces of these guys that have poured into my life, that have taken phone calls, where I'm crying, I'm mad, I'm hopeless, I'm just distraught, all these things, right? These people that have poured into my life and loved me and absolutely been in the trenches with me, I completely view it as my obligation. I look at it as like, if I was saved from drowning and I see somebody else that's drowning and I have the skills to save them, it's not a question of like, oh, should I take the time to go help? Now, how do I do that in recovery? It depends.
Sure.
I'm not going to personally mentor every single person I know for 2 to 3 years.
Right.
I lead a group. Not everybody that gives back has to lead a men's group, right? Not everybody has to, do an interview. There's different ways of giving back, but I do very much view recovery in the sense of I've been given this incredible gift of freedom from something that I did not think there was freedom from. So whatever giving back looks like, however it manifests over the time, and it's going to evolve probably, right? But I absolutely, I view it as like, I don't have a choice morally to not give back because of the gift that was given to me.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge too the choices that both you and Carrie made, because yes, God presented opportunities and people and resources, but you still have to make a choice as the person engaged with it to partake in it, to participate in it, to grab onto it. Because I think a lot of us have heard the story of the person who's out at sea and waiting to be rescued, and a helicopter comes and a ship comes and a boat comes and all these things come.
Yeah.
The person doesn't make it and gets to heaven and is asking where God was, and God's like, I sent a ship and a boat and a plane, and so at some point you got to make a choice to grab onto these things and engage and be part of it. And so I think that's a really important part, whether you listeners, you're faith-based or not, as these things come your way, this has to be an active, engaging choice by you to do that. So at what point did you all decide we are ready to start helping couples or men and women? When did you decide that was okay, this is the next step?
So some of my responses, there's been very clear, like there was this moment, there was this
Yeah.
time, or this
Yeah.
season. It wasn't really the case with this one. It mainly just because we started attending recovery groups, but we never stopped.
Yeah.
Now, along the way, there's been a shift of like survival mode. If I don't go to recovery, I'm worried that I'm going to fall off the wagon, right?
Gotcha.
And then it's like, okay, I'm not worried I'm going to, it's been 18 months. I'm not worried that I'm going to fall off the wagon and start looking at porn tomorrow. But I know I need to keep this infrastructure going.
Sure.
And then maybe around year 3, 4, 5, it's more of like I need healthy infrastructure, but I also need to be giving back. So there is a shift. It's a slow shift, but there is a moment, there is a thing that happened that, at least for myself, I won't speak for Carrie on this one, but at least for myself, it was a kick in the pants. And that was, so our mentors, Rick and Patty, so our mentors were a married couple who had been, was in porn addiction for years and years and years. And she obviously suffered the betrayal trauma through that. So our mentors, like two of the most special people on this earth, they moved. So we talked about Washington. They moved down to Washington a few years ago. Well, when you move from Alaska, it's a big deal. We're not close to anything. It kind of feels like there's a death. Like you don't know if you're going to see that person again.
Sure.
And so when they moved, we had some conversations about all kinds of things. But one of those things was, would we be willing to take over the groups and the responsibilities that would come with that? So, we did, there was literally a moment in time, or it was over the process of like a few weeks, a couple months of like kind of slowly taking over.
Sure.
But that definitely was a shift on a practical level, that we physically took over the groups. Right now, I'm about 8.5 to 9 years into recovery personally, May 19th, 2016. Well, when they moved, I think I was like 4.5 years or 4 years in.
Okay.
So I definitely, I was walking in freedom, but looking back on it, there was some stagnation. There was some like, I'm going to the groups and I want to go to the groups, but deep down, I probably didn't feel like I needed to go to the groups, and I wasn't necessarily focused so much on giving back. It was more of like, well, it's become a habit and it's a good habit.
Yeah.
But when I stepped into leadership, it was a kick in the pants of like, okay, am I making the kind of choices that a leader of a sexual addiction recovery group should be making? Am I working on myself daily, regularly, the way that a mentor should be working on themselves? Part of me taking over the group was I also took over a mentee, like a guy that was in the program that Rick had started to mentor. So I, finished walking that guy for the next 2 years, a little over 2 years. I walked with him through the program. Am I acting the way that I would hope my mentor would act? Right. So that was a heck of a motivator. That was a heck of an accountability shift of like, dude, you're not just one of the guys. Again, you're not supposed to be perfect, but like you act like the leader of this group.
Yeah,
right?
They're going to be looking to you for input and example and insight and those kinds of things.
Yes. Yeah. And so that really did help me go from a period of a little bit of stagnation to like, okay, I really need to make sure that I'm intentionally working on myself actively, not just sitting on my laurels of like, I did a lot of work and that was really good, but I don't really need to work so much. I can let off the gas a little bit. So that was a big shift for me.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important to point out too, that I think that is such human nature to have like, oh, I've been doing this for a while, and you kind of get comfortable. And this kind of forced you out of that comfort zone and kind of helped you to refocus. And I think too, and that really is such a good reminder of staying alert and staying on course, because I think, we go through seasons and we got to like check ourselves and go back. Okay, am I doing the things I need to do to fill my cup? Am I doing the things I need to do to make sure I'm alert and aware, and not putting myself in compromising situations that might challenge, boundaries and challenge triggers, all those kinds of things that we have to stay alert about. So before we go on I want to get into like your why and your values and how that informs the path you're on today. But before that, talk to me a little bit about the scientific piece of addiction. I don't think we talk about this enough. There are so many stigmas around people with addictions. And let's be honest, more of us have addictions than we hear about. And addictions look all different types of ways. We have the traditional ones we hear about, the drinking, the drugs. We do talk about the sexual addictions some, but there's shopping addictions, there's gambling addictions.
Right.
There's so many different kinds, eating addictions. I mean, there's so many different kinds of addictions, but and we talk a lot about people's backgrounds and have they been abused or what's their cycle been that might have put them on this road. But there's also a very scientific chemical piece of it. So talk to me about that a little bit, about what you've learned about that.
Yeah. One thing I do want to just say at the start too, because if anybody is listening to this or watching this and maybe they're hung up on the word addiction, and this could be for various reasons.
Sure.
I know personally, coming from a Christian background, there are people out there, and there's a segment of people out there that push back on the word addiction. Like, no, that's a label, and that's if you say you're an addict. So before we even say addiction or addict, here's my working definition of an addiction. Do I continually go back to a behavior that I know is destructive, I know it's unhealthy, but I can't seem to stop doing it? Like, you can, for all intents and purposes, you can throw out the word addiction for a little bit, right? Just answer that question.
Yeah.
Because if you're at all self-aware, if you're at all honest with yourself, you do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be time on phone, right? It could be video games. It could be Oreos. And we laugh about that stuff. But of course, those things not only are real, those things can be more insidious because guess what? They're not going to land you in prison. They're probably not going to break up your marriage, right? Not single-handedly, at least.
Right.
But those things can be every bit the addiction as me gambling away, my 401k, me having an addiction to affairs and pornography, me being addicted to alcohol. So just answering that question of, do I find myself doing unhealthy, destructive things that I know that they're unhealthy and destructive, but I keep doing them, can't seem to stop. And then one other thing, that word addiction, again, for me, growing up in the church, I very much held this view of I hear people talking about stuff like, one of the 12 steps, refers to, recognizing that I'm powerless to stop. Well, that sounded an awful lot to me like blame shifting. That means you're not taking ownership, right? If you're saying you're powerless to stop, then how can it be your fault? So either addiction isn't, so then it's not your fault, or there's something wrong with all this. And that's very much how I felt before recovery. And I have learned firsthand, what it means for both things to be true. Now that verbiage, we keep saying this because it's true. Verbiage matters. That verbiage, in my addiction, I'm powerless to stop. That verbiage can be taken and twisted and made into something that's a scapegoat.
Absolutely. And a crutch.
And I hit on this hard in recovery with my guys. But it is, both statements are true. In a way, I was powerless to stop, and yet not in a way, 100% I was responsible for my choices.
Yeah.
So, and I'll delve a little bit into the science. I'm going to stay really, really shallow.
Absolutely.
Just because I can refer some resources. I'll just say right now, so I don't forget. Check out the Conquer series. If anybody wants to understand more about sexual addiction, betrayal trauma, to be honest, addiction in general, but especially, it is about sexual addiction and betrayal trauma. That video series is incredible. If you just Google Conquer series, Ted Roberts, it'll come up.
And we'll put that on our resources and on our show notes, so that'll be there.
So it's the best single resource I know of if you want to be educated on this, if you want to just absorb some really, really good information. And just like my program that I went through, it's 3-pronged. It's absolutely scientific. It dives super deep into the science in a really approachable way, though.
Sure.
But it dives into the science of how our brains work and how our bodies work and all that. It is absolutely, it's a Christian-centered series. It's a Christ-centered resource. And then the third part is it absolutely hits on practical. What things can I do practically different? Not just head knowledge, but hey, how can I start living differently today? What things can I implement tomorrow?
Sure.
So the Conquer series is incredible. So I'll put it this way, and we you used the word autopilot a couple times earlier about something else, and that's a word that I absolutely will use to describe what it is to be an addict. Is it feels like I'm living on autopilot. It feels like I'm speeding down the highway in like a self-driving car, and I don't get to decide how fast we're going. I don't get to decide whether we stop or where we make a turn. I'm just going down the highway. And sometimes the scenery is a little bit better than others. Sometimes the road's a little bit better than others. Sometimes it's a more destructive drive than others. But ultimately, it's like, I just can't stop myself. I can't stop. That truly is what it felt like to be an addict. So that's where that powerless comes in. That powerless word comes in. What recovery has done is it's allowed me to see my decisions and slow everything down, just like a football player watching tape.
Okay. All right.
And so I can see like, okay, whether I'm looking at my past or I'm looking at current events, today, say, okay, yeah, like there's a trigger there and I wanted to do this, or I did do this thing. And then I wanted to do this next thing. I wanted to keep advancing it. And in my past, I know what it looked like. There's a thing called a relapse cycle that we go through in recovery. That's an incredible tool. And a couple of my Instagram videos, I broke it down just because it's basically me on autopilot going through the cycle of a relapse and what that looks like. And that all feels automatic. In my addiction, it feels automatic.
Wow.
But it's not. Each individual choice I'm responsible for, but it becomes so second nature that it almost feels like it's just happening. And so it is a really, really tricky balance. The other thing that happens too, rewiring my brain that's not a metaphor. The Bible talks about renewing your mind. That's not just a Bible verse. Like that's a real scientific thing that happens.
Absolutely.
Physically, right?
Yeah.
And so, neural pathways. I didn't know a thing about neural pathways when I was 22 years old, looking at porn and chasing after the dopamine hits that I didn't know what dopamine was, right? Like chasing after all this stuff. But that's what I was doing. And none of this is giving me an excuse, right? None of this is shifting blame, but it does help to explain why on earth would a guy who had a beautiful wife, who did everything she could to be available, who did everything she could to be the best wife possible, who did everything she could to be sexy and be a great mom and be a great person. And she did all those things because it wasn't about her.
Yeah.
It was about me having trained myself starting around age 10, flipping through the JCPenney catalog, around 13, looking at hardcore videos online, 18, 19, 20, looking at more porn, starting to interact with women. Let me get more. Let me get different. Let me get new. Let me get a different hair color. Like all these things. And I'm training myself like it's an X-rated version of a kid in a candy store.
Yeah.
And I can just have whatever I want whenever I want it, and I control it, right? And so the more I do that, I'm training my brain to act in that way, to chase after those types of pleasures, right?
Yeah.
And the more I do that, I'm teaching my brain that this is a good way to do things. This is a good way to operate. I'm not saying that. I don't even believe that, but I am teaching myself that because
and that's what your nervous. That's such an important distinction because your nervous system takes on whatever you're doing on the regular. That's what it decides must be safe.
Correct.
And when you're trying to learn new behaviors, it will feel unsafe for a while because your nervous system doesn't recognize that.
Right. It's muscle memory. I've never heard anybody say that sentence before. That's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah, my nervous system is deciding whatever I'm doing regularly is safe. I didn't think it's healthy to look at porn. I didn't think that it's healthy to cheat on life. but I did it so often that it became my MO. It became my second nature. And one thing that in the Conquer series does a really good job going over this, but I'll say it here is the more I train myself to do those things and the more I take on, those new neural pathways in a really destructive way, my limbic system basically gets more and more control of the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And my thinking brain gets less control.
Yeah.
So here's the scary thing. Here's what happens. It becomes truly, scientifically, it becomes harder and harder to make healthy choices. Now, it's not impossible.
Sure.
But it does become harder. And all of us know people who, and bear with me when I say this, I'm not making fun of anybody. I'm not bashing anyone, but we all know people where, not folks that have a condition or, they were in a car accident, but people that you look at them like they should be healthy. They should be making good decisions, but they don't, right? They make foolish decisions. They keep screwing up in their relationships. They keep screwing up in their jobs. And again, I'm not saying that they're not responsible for their choices, but they just can't seem to make the grown-up choices, right?
Yeah.
That's what happens. At least on the addict side, there's other ways of doing it. That's what happens is I continually make these choices, and it becomes harder and harder to think through long-term consequences, to think empathically, right? To think about how I'm affecting people in my family, to think about future Logan versus current Logan. It becomes harder and harder. I have to pull teeth to make a healthy choice sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so again, recovery made it possible, and it was always possible. Recovery made it seem possible. Because now I had to, just to go through my life, I had to be accountable for every step of the way. When I went to work, I had to text a selfie to my mentor. When I went to lunch, I had to text a selfie to my mentor. If any sort of a life routine got switched up, my wife was out of town for a weekend, or we got family staying with us, or whatever, I had to write safety plans. I had to write out my boundaries, right? So what that did, by forcing me to slow down and be methodical and be accountable, it forced me to write new ways of doing life.
Yeah.
And it gave me an opportunity to go, okay, how about we write some healthy computer code instead of the unhealthy stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. And it gives your nervous system time to recalibrate, because your nervous system, I said this earlier, it equates safety to familiarity when that's not necessarily the truth. And we know that, but it can be really alarming when you start trying to reset patterns and your nervous system feels out of whack. And that can be scary and can sometimes get people off track. But it's important to remember, it's like, no, this took years to wire this way. It's going to take some time for you to feel safe, your system to feel safe within this new way of doing things.
And think about it this way. Whether we know somebody like this, or we've certainly all seen it in a movie, or we've heard about it, celebrity, whatever, somebody comes out of rehab, somebody comes out of prison. And that person that I realize this is a straw man, but we all know real examples of this. Sure. That person who's troubled, who has a past, who had a history of making unhealthy choices, well, they've got a fresh start. Why don't they go start making healthy choices? And that person, very commonly, maybe most often, well, they don't go and start making all the healthy choices. They don't go building the healthy infrastructure. What are they probably going to do? Most likely, they're going to go surround themselves with what you just said, the familiarity, right?
Yeah.
Their old friends, their old hangouts, their old hobbies. And to some extent, sure, is there a social, like, well, it's their buddies and there's some of that for sure, but there's also a lot of it that's exactly what you're saying. Safety equals familiarity. Familiarity equals the old things that they used to do, the old people they used to hang out with, the types of things that got them into trouble. And like I keep saying, none of this is giving an excuse, but what it does is it helps prepare us, equip us with tools so that we can try to avoid some of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Oh gosh. So thank you so much for that. So good. All right. talk to me about your why and your values. I'm going to put these because I think these all three go together.
Sure.
And your expectations for your life now that you're on the, I don't want to say other side because life's a journey. This will be something you are walking out and will have to care for in some way the rest of your life. You have to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
But talk to me about how your why and your values and expectations really inform how you show up each day now.
Well, I appreciate that. And you can say on the other side, I'll end it with this though. On the other side of the cave, I always use the analogy of the cave.
Yeah.
Because, well, I struggle with temptation. Well, I struggle with a desire to do the unhealthy things sometimes. Absolutely. But I no longer feel trapped in that self-driving car, right? I don't feel like I'm trapped in the cave anymore. So I don't use words like fixed, or I don't even like using the word healed, just past tense.
Yeah.
But I do use words like no longer in bondage to sexual addiction, right?
Yeah.
No longer living in the cave.
Yeah.
I mean, my why, there are a couple things that absolutely, these are my whys, just period, is as a man who is raising 4 boys, to be an example, to help mold those boys into strong men who love each other and who love others and who I pray grow up to love God. That is absolutely a big why for me. As a husband, to be a man who loves my wife selflessly, who provides for her selflessly. And those might sound like I'm trying to give you the right answer. 100%. I mean those from the bottom of my heart because I went years feeling like I've forfeited my rights to even be that. So those are absolutely 2 big ones. But 100%. And in some ways, the biggest why that I have, and I say that just because I couldn't do those first 2 things if I didn't do this, which is my why is to give back, to be somebody who goes, hey, I know what it is to live in that cave. You don't have to live in that cave. You don't have to feel trapped. I promise you there's a way out. Your route might look different than mine, but there is a way out. And I can show you what it looked like for me.
Yeah, I think I like that, the way you presented that. And also too, the shift in expectations you've had for your life, where you were 10 years ago versus now. I mean, your expectations were at the bottom of the barrel because you just didn't see it. Whereas now you see what's possible, you know what's possible, you feel like you have choices. But you're also fully accountable and fully authentic. And you said it's something really important that I really love. No pun intended there. But you talked about the importance of your boys loving others and loving each other. And I don't think I think it's getting better now. I have a brother, my youngest brother has a son who's in the same age range as your kiddos. And he has been very mindful because this didn't happen with him. He's very mindful about sitting down with his kiddo every night and asking him about all the parts of his day. And what felt good, what felt hard, what touched your heart, really helping him learn how to access all of those feelings and all of those emotions, because there's a lot of scripts given out to little girls and little boys early on. And it doesn't always involve the permission for little boys to feel all their feelings and to show love and to show vulnerability and sensitivity. So I think those are really, really important tools that you're giving your boys, that I don't think we can underestimate the impact of that on them long term.
I appreciate that. And it is something that I take very seriously. And I've spent entire interviews focusing mostly on that topic of why. Because Jesus talks about the greatest commandment is to love one another. And it's not that I'm trying to Jesus said it, so I guess I should try, although that's not a bad way to go through life. But it's because, if I don't love others, then all of this stuff can just go out the window, right? If I don't love my wife, then I can do what I want as long as I don't get caught, right? If I don't love my wife, I can do just enough. I can be a good provider financially, and the other stuff doesn't matter. Or right? Like
Yeah.
I can go through all these mental gymnastics if I don't love others selflessly. And so that's why it is so important, and viewing others as humans, because I mean,
Yeah.
me as a man, big part of my ongoing healing journey is this evolution of initially in recovery, safety, number one priority, not acting
Sure.
out, not going back to my addiction, not looking at porn, number one priority, which meant there were lots of times where the best choice for me to make was to just avoid contact with women in a lot of cases, because I just didn't feel like I could operate in a safe space. Not because of them, because of me, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that was generally the right way to do it. Well, that's evolved to where, like, by God's grace and a lot of work and a lot of healing, we can have this conversation, or I can talk to somebody at work, and of course with boundaries and with healthy intentionality. But it's taken a lot of time to be able to look at all people, look at an attractive woman, to look at somebody, go, you are a human created in God's image. But it did take time to get from,
Sure.
I got to be safe, and that's the number one thing, to, well, the number one thing for me to do is to love people. And I don't know if that makes sense, but it's
absolutely. There's an evolution in the process of growing towards that and recognizing what you got to do early on to get yourself in the right space and on the right track. Accepting the layered aspects of ourselves. You had to cross, I would say you probably had to cross a bridge from feeling like you had secrets and shame versus living a life authentically and open with trust, so talk to me about that transition. Where did that, was there a clear shift where you started feeling that freedom, or is that still something that's evolving today?
Yeah. It was a really gradual shift for a long time basically meaning a year and a half to close to 2 years.
Okay.
Well, one thing that you asked, or one part of your question was, working on building trust and transparency. And there was, I think I've made it very clear. I did not become healthy when I got the ultimatum. I did not become healthy even when I got sober, right? Like, it wasn't like a light switch. So I don't think anybody's come away from this interview so far being like, Logan is really, really high on how awesome he was through all this process. Hopefully that's clear. But one thing that was true, and I think this is an accurate statement, is, man, I was really desperate and broken. And I was desperate and broken enough that even though I was imperfect at it, I was ready to try to do what I needed to do to build trust. Because I didn't want to live in that space that I was living in. Like, don't get me wrong, I was filled with selfishness. I still struggle with selfishness. I was filled with all kinds of unhealthy things. But I did desperately want to be a good husband and a good dad. I just, was coming from a place where I felt like I didn't know how, and I felt like I couldn't anymore.
Yeah.
So desperation and brokenness can be your best friends. I think
they can be great motivators.
Yeah. Like, of course, I got to be careful that I'm not living in shame, but like, desperation and brokenness, they absolutely should be there. If I've done the types of things I should do that I've done, I should be feeling those things and then letting them motivate me. In terms of like feeling freedom, I did not feel freedom when I got into the program. I did not feel freedom when I got my 1 month coin. I didn't feel freedom when I was 6 months sober. I definitely know that. I probably started to feel some freedom, maybe around a year or so, but it wasn't until I was almost graduated, which was a 2-year program. It wasn't until it was like, there wasn't a day, but there was like a season where I'd been in the program for at least a year and a half, if not almost 2 years. And I remember having this thought process of like, I don't think I have to look at porn anymore. Like, I hadn't done it for a year and a half, but I still for a while felt like I'll probably do it again.
Yeah.
Like, almost like it'll happen to me, right? Going back to that self-driving car thing.
Yeah.
I don't think I don't ever need to look at, like, I don't ever need to try to have an affair. I don't ever need to do that. I don't ever need to try to do something inappropriate with another woman. And like, just like I shared that, like, that, boundary story of like, I shouldn't cheat on my wife. These are like, should be common sense building blocks, right? But they weren't for me for so long.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like that was a possibility until about a year and a half in, when I'm like, I think I can go the rest of my life and not go back to that.
Wow.
And here's a dark statement, but it's definitely a true thing. I remember having thoughts of like, what if Carrie did leave me, or like, what if she died? Like, would I just do like Logan's Addiction Part 2 and just kind of go through the same cycle of like, just, filter through relationships and affairs and porn, and like, would I just go back to that? And there was a period of my life early in recovery for sure where I remember feeling like, not that I want that to be the case, but I probably just will. I probably just will, because I won't have this incredible motivator that is my wife.
Yeah.
That's a heck of a shift, right? To go from I'm doing this so that she doesn't leave me to I'm doing this because I don't want to keep hurting people.
Yeah. And also too, at what point did you feel good enough about yourself that I want to do this for me? Because I deserve to live a life healthy and well, and I'm human and I'm owning my peace. But I think just that understanding your own value piece.
That was probably 3-4 years in.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and I'm saying 3-4 years because it probably was around the time. So maybe it was like 4 years in, around the time of when Rick and Patty left, when I stepped into leadership, and like really kind of had some hard questions to answer about. I don't mean this like an overly traumatic way, but like, what am I doing here? Like, what actually am I just trying to continue staying sober for a while, which is like, that's better than the other, but like, is that really the main thing, or is there something greater at play?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. That was really, I appreciate the nuance in you sharing this experience, because I think we like quick fixes, and we, as human beings, we like quick fixes. We like a give me the steps and show me the direction, and 6 months I'll feel better. And that's just not how it goes. That's just not how it goes. And so the follow through and the patience and the being present and the mindfulness and the awareness that it has to continually be part of the journey, and being okay with, when you show up and start doing these things, whatever your motivation is, that can carry you until you get to the point where you feel good enough about yourself to keep doing it for you.
Yes. Something that I say quite a bit, one of the senior mentors at my group, he says all the time, is to new guys, whatever's motivating you, like your job, your wife, you're about to lose your kids into custody, like whatever is motivating you, for the most part, cool. Use that as fuel. Use that. Like, let's keep coming back. Like, just put your nose to the grindstone. Keep coming back, and kind of just like keep doing what you're told for a little while, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But that's not going to be forever. At some point, your motivation will shift, and that's if you keep coming back, like that will happen.
Yeah.
But it's okay if like everyone when they're brand new is extremely unhealthy. So we're all going to have unhealthy motivators and selfish motivators. But yeah, just recognizing like over time that will shift, and it will no longer become just the selfishness or just, I don't want to lose my family, or even like sobriety. I say a lot, like sobriety is not the goal. It's not the thing. Sobriety is just a tool that allows me to live life in a healthy way. It's the tool that lets me get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Talk to me, and we're getting ready to wrap this up here. We could talk forever. You have so much to share, but we got to start wrapping this up. Talk to me about, in summary, we call this the Field Podcast, finding empowerment, embracing layers. You have done that in this journey. Your wife has done that in her journey, and hopefully we get to visit with her someday when she's ready to talk about that more. You've done that. Talk to me about the impact that has had on your relationship with yourself and your relationship with other people, because there's been a whole process you've had to go through in your relationship with yourself and other people that's required in this this healing process. So talk to me about that. I can't imagine what that's been like.
I mean, I very much, I want to be a servant. I want to have a servant's heart. I want to be somebody who is selflessly loving others, whatever that looks like.
Sure.
Right. And of course, selflessly loving my boys looks one way. Selflessly loving my wife looks a different way. Selflessly loving a woman who is going through some rough stuff, who I'm talking to, who is, I'll tell you right now, and this is going to sound really harsh, but it's reality. The type of person that I would have sought to prey on in my addiction, loving her selflessly is going to look extremely different than those first two, but I can still do that.
Sure.
Loving my mom, loving my coworkers, like I can love people selflessly. I can serve them. It's just going to look different with different people.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm trying to answer both questions at once, I guess, of like, my relationship with myself.
Well, let me reframe this. Talk about how you felt about yourself 10 years ago versus how you feel about yourself now.
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, I remember watching this video, totally forgetting his name, but this NBA player who had a really powerful story. And it was a really powerful story of heroin addiction. And I love his story. And he gives this anecdote of he would brush his teeth in the shower because he couldn't look at himself in the mirror. So he had to brush his teeth in the shower.
Wow.
And I remember hearing that. And this was early on in recovery. And I didn't literally do that same thing. I brushed my teeth in front of the mirror. But I 100%, I know what he means. Like he had a very literal manifestation of that. I could look at myself in the mirror, but I hated myself. I hated who I had become. I saw myself as, I am only a monster. I wished so badly that I could die. I wished so badly that God had not given me to those boys, given me to carry. Like I remember hating the fact that my family, was like cursed with me. That's how I felt. Just laying in bed, like literally, like I didn't think I could pray because I wasn't worthy of that. So I felt. It's not theologically accurate, but that's how I felt. And it's just like God, why did you put me on this earth? Like you knew I was going to do this stuff. Why would you put me here? Why would you just not have created me? So that's, painting the picture. That was me for a lot of years.
Yeah.
And I guess this is like kind of full circle. I mean, talk about authenticity. I know I'm not a perfect dad, a perfect husband, a perfect man, but I know that I'm authentic. I know that I don't just have good intentions. I had good intentions sometimes as a 22-year-old, as a 24-year-old. I had good intentions. Very little follow through, a lot, but I had some good intentions. But I know that I don't just have good intentions, but I act on those intentions, and I work to protect my family. I work to protect myself. That I do intentionally show love, not perfectly, but authentically.
Yeah.
And so it's just being able to that imagery of the addict not being able to look himself in the mirror. Really, I think about that like spiritually, emotionally. I couldn't look at myself. Emotionally, I didn't want to look at myself in the mirror, and now I can, and I can work on character defects. I can work on weaknesses and go, okay, yeah, I struggle with that. I'm struggling with this issue right now, and I'm not going to leave it unchecked. If left unchecked, this would be a bad thing, but I'm going to work on it, and I'm going to own it, and I'm going to be accountable for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can do that. I think too, like it doesn't feel insurmountable anymore. Like, I feel like you've got so many tools and you've created this life where it's like, no, I have choices, and I have, and because I also want to say the people we surround ourselves with, the content we surround ourselves with, the lifestyle, it matters. It matters. You cannot it matters to surround yourself with people that love you well, that love you in a healthy way, that love you authentically, that want well for you.
Yeah.
And that you do, and that you're able to give that back. Those things matter, and also to getting to a point in our healing where we realize, no, I'm worthy of that and I need that and it's important. And and so I think that's, and you've been very intentional about that shift too. And not because of just because of how you shared your story and the way you engage in life now. And so, think about those things too. Those of you that are listening, if you're struggling with this yourself, or you have a partner or a friend or a sister or a brother or whoever else that is, look at those things. Who are you surrounding yourself? What kind of activities? What kind of people?
Right.
All those things, they can't do the work for you, but it matters having people that want what's well for you versus people that are not invested in that.
So much. And I'm chuckling because I'm also reminded of all of these things like my mom would tell me as a teenager, right?
Yes,
The music and the friends. And I'm like, I'm like blowing her off. I'm like, no. Oh yeah, that's all true. Okay. I'm not going to try to quote it because I'll butcher it, but there's, James Clear has this awesome part of Atomic Habits, right? It's like, immerse yourself in a culture where the types of things that you aspire to be and do is normal, right? Is celebrated.
Yeah.
And you can apply that with getting healthier physically. You can apply that to your work ethic. Of course, you can apply that to life in general, but everything. And so, I literally built one of the recovery lessons that we did one week was just built off of that one statement. It's like, how can we implement that with recovery? It doesn't mean that we only hang out with people in recovery, but it does mean that I'm going to be willing to maybe spend time or maybe spend less time or maybe spend no time with some people who I normally would hang out with. But I tend to make unhealthy choices when I'm around them, or they tend to, batter me emotionally or whatever. And I'm going to spend time with people where even if they're not in recovery from the same addiction I am, but as you said, they love me, they care about me, they care about my best interests. They're going to hold my feet to the fire, or whatever that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. All right. We are down to the rapid fire. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
Playing basketball for sure. I love playing basketball. I got to be careful because it is something where I can, struggle emotionally and get frustrated, but this is supposed to be rapid fire. Basketball. I can name 5 activities just with my wife, but that's I'll cheat and just say hanging out with my wife. I love spending time with my wife. So hanging out with my wife, playing basketball, hiking, which is something that I hated as a kid, but I've grown to love as I finally realized what a beautiful state I live in.
Yeah.
I got to be going uphill though. I don't just like walking laterally. I don't enjoy that, but I got to be going uphill. Oh man. Most of this that I love is hanging out with Carrie. That's a big one. Talking about recovery is definitely one. Talking about C.S. Lewis with my sister.
Put that one in. Oh, I love that's fun. No, that's a good
that's a very specific one.
And I love that though. There's always these fun facts about people that people wouldn't necessarily guess about. You can use that in a trivia, like what's something about Logan that you wouldn't know. I love that. That's so good. All right. 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
Proud. I don't mean that in the ego sense, but proud of the decisions I've made.
Yeah.
Thankful. Aware. Patient. Empathetic. Is that 5 or 6?
Yeah, that's 5. That's great.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you for that. And tell people where they can find you and follow you, get access to your resources, all those things.
Yeah, this is really skinny. Instagram. That is where I put my work. I'm at No Longer in Bondage. Everything I do, whether it's interviews or Instagram, this is all just a branch of recovery ministry for me. This is not something I do for any monetary gain. It's just a ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously there's a limited amount of time and resources, but if anybody has questions, if you need help, if you want to ask about resources, shoot me a message, leave me a comment, whatever. And I promise you, I'll respond back to you. Obviously there's a sharp bent towards sexual addiction awareness and recovery, betrayal trauma. But ultimately, a lot of my content is going to be applicable for other things too, in terms of, addictions in general, right? Working on being healthier. And if you have questions, there's a really strong likelihood I'm not going to be the number one person to answer your question, but I can be one of the hands reaching in to help out, right? So if you have any questions, please reach out to me, let me know, and I would love to help as much as I can.
Okay, great. All right. And all that information we will share on our resources page on our website at embracinglayers.com. It will be on our socials. It'll, all those places you'll be able to check that out. Logan, thank you so much for your time today. I really, we could have gone on forever, and we did in a little bit, but it was important. I went into this knowing that I wasn't going to be worried about time as long as the content was important and helpful and resourceful and provided people with information and knowledge and hope. Because I think that this addiction can be a very hopeless place. And it's important for people to know it doesn't have to end there. And to hear, someone that's on your side of it taking ownership and accountability for your part, and also completely acknowledging your partner's journey in this and what's been necessary for her to heal. I just thought I knew those pieces were all going to be so important. So thank you for your time. And again, thank you for the emotional labor. This is, you talked about it being an activity that nourishes you, but there's also a cost that comes with this that I'm sure you have to be mindful of, and how much time you can give to it. Each week. So thank you for taking the time with us today. I really appreciate it. Listeners, these are some of these conversations we have to talk about. We've got to create safe spaces for, remove the shame from, and know there are resources and support systems out there to help this, regardless of which side of this that we're on. So I hope that this is something that provides that for you today. Take good care of yourselves this week. Love yourselves well, love others well, and have a great week.